During the Steam sale, I bought Dark Souls 3. It was only £10 and I thought, why not? I didn't like the original Dark Souls, although I had friends that were a fan of it, and they seemed to enjoy my blind playthrough of it, up until I abandoned it. I decided to get the third game for a number of reasons, and not just because it was cheap. I had heard they had upgraded from 720p 30 frames a second to 1080p at 60 frames a second, and the combat was smoother as a result, so hey, that's a good thing. I had also heard it was simultaneously easier than the previous Dark Souls games, while also having some of the harder bosses like Lord Pontiff. There are also Souls-like games that I am interested in. I like Deck 13's The Surge, and their other game, Lords of the Fallen, while not as good, was at least playable, although I didn't finish that one. I'm looking forward to The Surge 2, and I'm interested in playing Bloodborne, but I can't justify getting a PS4 just for one game that I may or may not like. I say all of this because my plan for Dark Souls 3 was fairly simple. I would buy it and do a blind playthrough of it just as I did the first one, and hopefully I would actually finish it this time. But, as you could probably guess from the title of this video, I have abandoned that plan. By far the biggest reason is that I simply don't like the game. I'll go into why in a little bit, but it will suffice to say that when a game starts feeling like work, I have no desire to play it. And since YouTube isn't a job for me, it's just something I do as a hobby, I've got no real reason to stick with it. But there's a few things about the game I want to address, specifically for people that told me things about the game. Now before I played, I was told not to play a magic class and not to play any kind of shield or parry based class. And the reason was that the game was apparently full of collision detection issues, and having played the game I can confirm. There are these weird moments where I'd parry an enemy, I'd clearly parry the enemy, but I'd still take the hit even though my character wouldn't react to taking the hit. And armor apparently isn't worth much in these kind of games in general, since if you're getting hit you're doing it wrong. But even if you do go for an armor build, apparently poise is no longer a thing. I was never far enough into Dark Souls to really understand poise, but apparently you have no ability to tank hits, at least that's my understanding. Even in heavy armor you can be stun locked by even light enemies. So play a dodge class, right? But here's the problem. The dodge class doesn't solve the problem. And there's a number of reasons for this. So one of them is that the same weird collision detection problem that happens with parrying and shields also happens with dodging. There were a couple of times where I would see a hit coming, I would try and dodge out of the way, but the enemy's hit would connect, my character would flinch, and then once the flinch was done, with no other input from me, my character would then do the dodge roll. It was very strange, and it's as if your inputs are being buffered ahead of time. Not only that, but bosses and elite enemies will pivot around to hit you even if you successfully dodge behind them. Now, in my opinion, that's what wide sweeps should be for, to stop you from just rolling behind them. But no, even a thrust or an overhead swing, they will spin round so that it will still connect once the dodge completes. This problem is made worse by the way that enemies will thrash around randomly. Supposedly enemies play by the same rules as you, but they can just spam attacks all day. I'm told that the way around this is to try and bait out a specific attack that leaves them open, but that's not how I like to play games. I don't like to exploit every flaw in the AI by like standing somewhere where they can't get you or triggering a specific animation. It's the melee combat equivalent of playing a first-person shooter where you run around a corner, let the enemy spot you, then hide around the corner with a shotgun and then gun them down as they run around the corner to get you. It's not fun, and it's not how I like to play games. There's also a bunch of minor annoyances too. In Dark Souls 1, I think you could level up just at any bonfire, but in this game you have to go back to the hub world, talk to a woman, wait for her to finish her speech, then buy your level ups, and then go back to the bonfire to teleport to the point where it seems completely needless. The final thing I want to mention as part of this little rant is the advice that I've gotten when playing the games. This happened in Dark Souls 1, it happened in Dark Souls 3. I'd be given some solid advice by different people. If you've given me advice, then you probably know who you are. And a lot of this makes sense. I mentioned before how I was taught to play an agility class because shield classes don't really work and magic has been nerfed into the ground. Okay, makes sense. So I decided when starting the game to pick the thief, the agility guy, right? But apparently that's not what you're supposed to do. Apparently the thief is the worst starting character, which probably explains why I died like a dozen times to the first boss. Apparently what you're supposed to do is pick the warrior or the knight and then respec them into thieves. I don't know how you're supposed to know that on a first playthrough. I mean, hell, I was told playing a character with high armor and poise was useless, so why would I pick the knight or the warrior? Well, it turns out it's got something to do with the way the stats are. They have the best starting stats that allows them to use the best weapons early on, and the warrior can do the most damage, so you want him, and then whatever. It's a big mess. I don't want to dismiss my friends, and I do believe that they are giving good advice, but I'm wondering if that is stuff that's advice that is good advice for a second playthrough, or I don't know how to describe it. Because I will get advice from someone, like the whole players and agility class thing, and then I will act on that advice and pick an agility class, only to then be told, sometimes by the same person, sometimes by a different person, that I'm supposed to play a different kind of class, but then build them into an agility class. And those are from my friends who are just trying to give me advice to help me along. When you get into the Dark Souls community on the internet, then it gets into crazy town. One of the things with the Let's Play is that I was going to give it a silly name, something like the Scrub Run. And the reason for that is the Dark Souls community has these weird rules for what is considered a legitimate playthrough. And it's very strange, and I don't understand if there's any logic to it at all. To give an example, I often see that you're not supposed to use items. Why? The items that I did use in the game, like the fire bombs, they weren't that powerful. It's not like the fire bombs were just the I win button, but they were banned for some reason if you want a legitimate run. Another one that I saw was on a Dark Side Phil video where he was playing Dark Souls and he lured enemies into like a dragon that's breathing flame along a castle wall, and that way he could get some easy kills. So he lured enemies into a trap that was in the game, and there was comments complaining that he wasn't supposed to do that because that's cheesing the game. But at the same time, you're supposed to like cheese the boss's AI in order to win. I don't get the logic here. There doesn't seem to be any consistency. It's just as if they're making up rules as they go along. Anyway, this rant is already way longer than I originally intended, so I'm going to cut it here. I might in the future go back and let's play this, but I doubt it. And if I do, I am probably going to ignore a lot of the advice that I've got, or go the complete other way and just use a walkthrough and get the best beginner viable build or something, I don't know. Alternatively, if you guys want it, I can do a let's play of any of the Deck 13 games, so Lords of the Fallen, The Surge, maybe The Surge 2 when that comes out. Or, you know, if I can get them working, I could do other From Software games like Armored Core or Kingsfield or something. But for now, I'm throwing in the towel on the Dark Souls 3 Let's Play.